relieve pressures and enhance support, and what kinds of communities and areas of our lives help us to relieve pressures and add support. So I am honored and we're grateful that you're here. On behalf of Crescent Cove, we have a number of board members who are here. Thank you. And volunteers and clinicians and our staff members. And then we welcome all of you who are getting to know more about who we are as Crescent Cove. Housekeeping detail, there is wireless internet, so it's Sunrise Guest if you need that and want to jot it down, and North for Good, the code. And we thank Sunrise Banks for donating the space to us. It's been wonderful to be here. It's much easier parking this morning for those of you who were here yesterday afternoon. And later today, or later in this morning, we'll have Mary Stoik, who helped handle a pretty big situation for us. We accessed a new market tax credit loan, and Sunrise Banks is the only bank in our community that handles those kinds of transactions. So that was enormous help from them as well. And then they welcomed us to hold our symposium here this year, which is great. Also, we want to thank Ellie's Light. Is Tiffany DeRoma here? Tiffany is Ellie's mom, and she is on the parent panel in a little while. But this is a significant week for her because yesterday was the anniversary of Ellie becoming an angel. And she was going to share more about that if she can come. But these are moments that we want to honor and mark, that families, and as Crescent Cove, our families are our families. We honor those children and families. Thank you also to Gillette Children's Specialty Healthcare. Todd Delberg, Pediatric Palliative Care physician, was here yesterday to welcome us. They're sponsoring our CEUs. So this is a note, if any of you have a handwritten name tag, that means we most likely don't have your email address or contact details, in which would impact you getting a certificate of attendance. So if your name tag is handwritten, please, at some point this morning, return to the registration table to make sure we do get your email address, so it could be added. At the close of the symposium this afternoon, an email will be sent to you with a link to take a survey or an evaluation that's required in order to then be sent the certificate of attendance. So you have CEUs and CMEs available to you for attending here, thanks to Gillette's. And then also to Kim Burning, who helps us and has since we started as a nonprofit 9 years ago with our design needs on a pro bono basis. So just a quick disclosure of compliance for the CEUs too to share. And now I want to welcome our board chair, who is the impetus, who really inspired us to host such a gathering. We thank you, Jim, for your leadership and wisdom and guidance to lead our organization, but also this important symposium. And then he'll introduce our medical director, Dr. Michelle Peterson, who will give a few updates on Crescent Cove as well. Thank you, Jim and Michelle.
Thank you. For those that are new today, I want to extend a welcome to you from the board. We very much appreciate all you as community leaders, clinicians, family members, volunteers, joining us in this mission to support the kids and their families. The other thing I want to do before introducing Michelle to share some updates with you is to mention that we are already wondering about the symposium for next year. So as you heard from Carla, when you get an email to help us evaluate this one, what was useful, what was maybe soft that we could try and improve, but also look for themes and share those themes back with us, either in the email or on some of the cards at your table. We would very much value and appreciate that. So it's my pleasure now to introduce you to Michelle Peterson. She's our medical director. She's been a real high energy spark plug in looking at how we look at the clinical dimensions and some of the relationships across the community to make sure that we can do as much as we can for our kids. So Michelle, welcome, and please share a few more comments. Thanks.
Thanks to everyone for coming back again today. Today is going to be more focused on Crescent Cove, where yesterday was kind of a overview of all children's hospices. And as Jonathan said so eloquently yesterday, the third of hundreds to come, correct? So we are excited to say next week we will have our first patient who's going to begin our opening 24 24/7 to serve families 24/7 for ever and ever and ever. So we have hired a ton of really talented, skilled nurses from the ICU, oh, Joe, there's Charlie. Who can't love that picture, Charlie? From ICUs, from ERs, from the HEMONC program at Children's and Gillette. It's fabulous. They've continued to grow and are so committed to our mission. Sorry, I keep looking at Grant. We also have some CNAs who are continuing to be hired, and wonderful volunteers who have provided already fabulous services to many of our patients, and will continue to do so in bigger and bigger ways as we're open 24/7. Yeah. I gotta say one more thing, because the next session is going to be the best session of the 2 days, because my boy is going to be part of it.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all again for being here. And just another note, as you probably noticed, we had a shift in our look as we were moving into the operations of Crescent Cove and opening our home for kids and families. We thank Tara, our Director of Engagement, for saying it's time we need to print all new materials instead of saying let's build a home for kids and families. We need to share our home. And if you've seen Crescent Cove, if you haven't, you're welcome always to come. But if you've been there, you know we have this just absolutely amazing art, sensory, interactive, serene wall in the center of the home that has a number of dragonflies. So we've really embraced and embodied that symbol and the meaning, of course, of that transformation that is happening each and every day within each of us, but of course for our amazing kids and families. And Russell Herder helped us do that on a pro bono basis, looking at what our brand would look like as we communicate who we are. Of course, keeping the child's face at the center, but really we're serving a family, as we talked so much about yesterday. It's the siblings, the parents, the grandparents, everyone, the community around that family, which is our panel who's coming up in just a moment. So now to begin, we welcome back Leah Goberstein, who's a member of our planning committee for the symposium, along with Dr. Jeannie Goodspeed, Dr. Jim Rice, and Ted Bowman. And Ted will come up again. Thank you, Ted, again for facilitating such a meaningful conversation. After we have a centering meditation led by Leah with the singing bowl. So thank you. That was beautiful yesterday morning, and we'll start now with a centering meditation by Leah.
Good morning. So please silence your phones for just a few moments. We'll have this morning meditation. And close your eyes. And rest your hands comfortably in your laps, please. Focus on the breath. We're going to start by inhaling for a count of 2, holding the breath for a count of 2, and then exhaling for a count of 4. So starting now, breathe in for a count of 2, hold the breath, 1, 2, and exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now at your own pace, take several of these counted breath cycles on your own. Breathing in for a count of 2, holding for a count of 2, and then exhaling for a count of 4. And when you're finished, let go of the counting and allow your breath to return to its natural rhythm. And just take a moment to notice how you're feeling after taking a few deliberate, relaxing breaths. And become a witness, watching your breath gently flowing in and gently flowing out. Smooth, steady, effortless breathing. And now you're going to rotate your consciousness through your body as you follow my words. Keeping your breath smooth, rhythmic, and natural. You're going to sense your breath in different areas of your body. Start by sensing your breath in your head. Let your breath explore your nasal cavities, your eye sockets, your inner ears. Feel into your breath as it explores your entire head, and notice if any colors, sensations, or images arise. No judgment, just notice anything that may come up for you. And as you continue to breathe naturally and effortlessly, let your breath now explore your chest. Do any sensations or colors or images arise as your breath moves through and explores your chest? And now let your breath spill into and explore other areas of your body. Your abdomen and your pelvic area. Your arms and legs. Your back. Again, noticing any accompanying colors or sensations, anything that comes up for you. Just observe it and then let go of it. Your breath saturating your organs, your cells, your entire being filled with life-affirming and cleansing breath. And now just sit for a few moments and let the music take you deeper into your breath and into yourself. Keeping your eyes closed, we'll end this meditation with the poem, Why I Wake Early, by Mary Oliver. Hello, sun in my face. Hello, you who made the morning and spread it over the fields and into the faces of the tulips and the nodding morning glories, and into the windows of even the miserable and the crotchety. Best creature that ever was, dear star, that just happens to be where you are in the universe, to keep us from ever darkness, to ease us with warm touching, to hold us in the great hands of light. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Watch now how I start the day in happiness, in kindness. Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning to you. Good morning to you. We're all in our places with bright, shiny faces. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Second verse is same as the first. Join in with me. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. We're all in our places with bright, shiny faces. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Look at each other as you sing the third verse. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. We're all in our places with bright, shiny faces. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. How about that? We're singers as well. We're all music therapists. We didn't even know it. Well, welcome to day 2. And welcome especially to those of you who were not with us yesterday. We welcome you. And those who have returned, we welcome you as well. For those of you who were not here yesterday, so that you have a chance to interact, let me at least call attention to our 2 prominent guest speakers so that you can interact with them. There were many other speakers during the day and a very rich day, but the long distance award this year goes to Katrina Rosanova from the Czech Republic, Sam and Wade. Jonathan Potter from Ryan House in Arizona. For those of you who are not here, now you see who they are and catch them at the break or at the end of our session just to say hello and welcome being part of this. Part of what we were doing over the 2 days, as Katie mentioned, is looking at basic needs and communities of care. And we moved back and forth between those 2, that intersection, if you will, throughout the day. Talking later in the day yesterday about spaces, how to create nurturing environments, how to use space as a place for nurture and efficiency and so on. We talked about who's on your team. How do we begin to enlarge our team so that it's not all on our shoulders, but that we can employ and utilize the support of others as we move through difficult challenges in our lives. We talked about the conversations that are the difficult conversations around especially dying and hospice and end-of-life care, and suggested that that should begin early and often, that we should be willing to help people to address their ambiguity, to address their concerns, and that lack of clarity also often can create more dissonance and more distress for us than actually embracing, as Rumi says in his famous poem, this being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Things happen. And the next line of the poem is welcome and entertain them all. Welcome and entertain them all. Get a second opinion. Find out if this is for real. But even if it's the worst news that I ever want to hear, I remember the call from my son when my grandson was near death. And he said, "Dad, this is the call I never wanted to make." Now we had to embrace what was happening to my grandson. Many of you know those kinds of experiences and so on. So it's that we want to continue on today, looking at support systems as well as some very specific manners that stress us. We'll divide the reason that some of the chairs and tables have been moved in this middle area since you were here yesterday, those of you who were present, is that we will separate and have a breakout after the break. And some of you will address and want to address financial matters. The struggles with paying the bills, of just paying the mortgage, of all the costs that go with having a child with a life-limiting, life-threatening condition. And how do we as volunteers and professionals sit with people who are struggling with financial matters that are distracting them from their own quality of life and so on. So that will happen in one part of the room, and in the other part of the room later the rest of you can choose how do you be your best advocate in terms of medical care? How do you begin to speak up in ways that some of us have not been taught to do, to be assertive? And how do we get the best information about what's available? You remember Jonathan's story of being told one thing by one medical provider, and he and his family were struggling with that, and someone said, slow down. Slow down. Let's listen for what else is available out there. And so that will be the second option as we move later in the morning. And so 2 stories before we invite our panelists to come up. And this involves you being part of improvisational theater at your tables there. You may know this story. An old man is dying. He calls his people to his side. He gives a short, sturdy stick to each of his offspring, his wife, his relatives, and friends. So would you hold the stick? This is the improvisational theater. You each have a stick in your hand. And now will you use both hands and will you break the stick? With some effort, they snap their sticks in half. This is how it is when a soul is alone and without anyone. They can easily be broken. This is how it is when a soul is alone and without anyone. They can easily be broken. Next, the old man gives each of them another stick and says, this is how I would like you to live after I die. Tie your sticks together in bundles of 2s and 3s. He waits quietly as the family ties their sticks together. Will you join hands with someone at your table as if you were tying your sticks together? Now are many bundles, some of them 2 sticks, some of them 3 sticks. Now, break these bundles into half, he says. No one can break the sticks when there are 2 or more in a bundle. The old man smiles. We are strong when we stand with another soul. When we are with others, we cannot be broken. Would you say thank you to your neighbors there for being here, for being part of this? So, what we're going to do this morning is something that's important. It's also a bit delicate because you invite people to have this conversation. They may think that at the end of the day, the results or the desires they have may be something that happens. As I said yesterday, our actions here together are to raise consciousness and to help us to begin to think about some of the issues of best practice in terms of whole person care. And so we're going to look today at something that not all the hospices have looked at in the same way that we're looking at it in the next hour and a half or so. And it's looking at the issues of support for families surrounding the quality respite care and medical support that will happen at Crescent Cove and in our adjoining hospital systems as needed. Many of the hospices in the UK focus on having quality respite care, quality end-of-life care, quality hospice care for the children, and that's their primary mission. And Jonathan was urging us yesterday to be aware that we cannot be all things to all people, and that we need to be selective about what we can do well and what can we find in the community and help families find in the community. But we're going to begin to look at support for families as they go through these kinds of experiences and so on. And so we're going to start with inviting 2 people to come up to share their own stories of living in families where there was a child with a life-limiting and life-threatening condition. And we've asked them to share what was helpful at a time like that. What did they do? What did others do? What supports were available? How did they get through that? How did they get out of bed in the morning? How did they keep going? And what was missing? What did they yearn for in hindsight or even at the moment that they wished could have occurred, but for whatever reason did not occur, and so on, so that we have more information, more consciousness, if you will, about the need for support, and so on. They're going to ask them to kind of stand back and look a bit from a distance and say, what do they know now that they wish they'd known then? So we hear the personal stories first around that. We even have our 3rd speaker. Welcome, Tiffany. Good to see you. I hadn't met you before and didn't know if you were going to be here. Glad you are. So we will have our 3 speakers come up in just a moment. Then we will move in table conversations for each of you, because this is a conversation we all need to have with one another of if Crescent Cove has to make tough choices, given budget constraints, given staff limitations, given whatever, what are some of the filters that Crescent Cove board and staff should make in choosing which social supports can be available to our families? Remembering we cannot be all things to all people. And so it's to think about not only sibling care, couple support, parent support, bereavement support, whatever it might be, we want you to think about what are the filters that might be used. And again, that's simply be used by the board and the staff as they make these important decisions. Kate Robusco and I will talk a little bit about what we know that is available in the community so that we have that information after we have our family panel. So if I can ask Tiffany and Grant and Elaine to come up. Remember, we're asking them to share their personal stories, and each of them has a personal story to share. You have the information for you there in the booklet about them. I'll let them elaborate their own stories. It's best that they tell it, not me, and so they will do that in their own way. Elaine even has a board now to help her do some show and tell when we come to that. Elaine, since you're moving that, should we ask you to be the first one? Oh, Grant's going to be the first one? Okay. Grant's going to be the first one. Let's hear your story.
Sure.
Each of them is going to take 10 or 12 or whatever minutes to share the story, and then we'll move to have some conversation with them after that. Welcome, Grant.
Thank you, Ted. Hi, my name is Grant.
Use this one.
Hold it close. Sure. Name's Grant. Thank you, everybody, for Katie, everybody for getting this Crescent Cove thing going. It's pretty great. I'll try to look in the rear view here and see what I can dig up. I grew up with my sister Jenny. She had Sanoff disease when I was young, before I get going here, I just want to say I have awesome parents. My mother Joy and my father Greg, my step-parents, they did a wonderful job. So I don't want to sound like, this is a big pity party and I had a terrible, terrible upbringing. But they did a great job. They did everything they possibly could with what was available. I'm quite a bit removed from this. This is almost 25 years ago since Jenny died. I know things, at least I hope things have progressed with the amount of care you get with a dying child. But from what I remember, we'll try to look into it here. And growing up, I think I had I thought I had a great childhood. I mean, for me, it was all I could really, it's all I knew. So I thought it was normal. But when you look in the rearview mirror and you look back years later, you see that it was not normal, and if anything, it was kind of chaotic. But Jenny dying, we had you mentioned a team, and we had quite the team. We had Michelle Peterson, who was an aide for my mother growing up, and it was great help.
Pull the microphone up, if you will. Yeah.
It was great help having an aide with Michelle there. But from what I remember, my mom was always tired, constantly. It's just, I don't think my mom ever had enough sleep. And when she was sleeping, which it seemed like maybe the whole day away, it just didn't seem like it was ever enough. Sometimes, you just kind of, you feel left out a little bit. You think you have this perfect presentation until you get up here and spotlight's going on. But she just always, my mom always just seemed so damn tired. Everything happened at home. When Jenny was dying, we had a crew of nurses coming in and out that I didn't know. I still remember, missing a lot of school. I found that as a kid growing up, my mom was so occupied with Jenny that I could really get away with a lot of stuff. I found out that if I just pretended to sleep in, I could miss my bus and miss a lot of school. I mean, things were so crazy. My mom was so occupied with Jenny that I could kind of fall through the cracks on things like that. Structure wasn't a big thing. Like, we were just trying to figure out how to get through the day with Jenny. So for me, bedtimes, I didn't have a bedtime, I watch Arsenio Hall every night. To try to put it in perspective of like how long ago this was. But 6 years old, I moved a TV into my room. I mean, things I would do on my own. I was a little mischief kid, and I could get away with it because there wasn't anybody there for me like that. So bedtimes weren't really there. Getting up in the morning, my mom would be in the bedroom, and I would just pretend to miss the bus. And if I woke her up, she'd be so tired, she'd say, well, we already missed, so much of the day already, let's just stay home. So for me, I missed a ton of school as a kid. I was really able to kind of slip through the cracks that way. They're missing a ton of school, just doing kind of what I wanted. I don't think it was normal to be 7 years old and doing your own laundry, getting yourself ready. If I wanted to go to school, I would get on the bus and go to school. If not, I just didn't have anybody else there to kind of get me through the day and do the stuff that I noticed that the rest of my friends had. And I didn't really pick up on any of that till years later. One thing I had for support though, like I said, Michelle Peterson was huge. I had an awesome pediatrician, Tim Anderson. I know there's some doctors in the room, some people are gonna know him. That guy went above and beyond what he had to do, making house calls, taking me out with his family because he knew that I was not doing things that most kids were doing. He would pick me up, take me to a movie with his kids. He would take me roller skating, fishing, things that were so outside of the norm, I think, for any other doctor. I don't think a child patient and a doctor like that. I can't think of too many of my peers at the time that knew their doctor by first name, or when you went to the office to get a checkup would order pizza. And things like that where I was comfortable with him. And for anybody in the medical field that's dealing with kids in a unique situation like that, that was something I look back on in a positive way, and that was a great deal of help for our family. Having Michelle was, God, without her, things were pretty chaotic. I'm not getting a pretty good picture of this, but I really did whatever the hell I wanted. I was just kind of able to do that, but when she was around, hey, we're going to look at this spelling book here that, we need to get in on this stuff. And the night Jenny died at home. Michelle knew that she was ready to go, and this was it seemed like a 2-month process where any day Jenny could have gone. And we knew it was getting right up to the end of it, and my mom had Jenny in her arms and one of our spare bedrooms, which is now converted into a hospital room. She brought me downstairs, and we were actually working on a spelling book. And we were doing spelling, and then Michelle went upstairs, and Jenny was gone, and that's when things really got kind of chaotic. It was nuts leading up to Jenny dying, but the care that would have been nice to have was after, when things really came crumbling down. I lost my mom in the bedroom for 3 years. I just didn't have a mom. Stay there, Shell. I'm trying not to go away. Seriously, go away. She was great, and then Shell started up, going to school to be a doctor, and she was gone for a while too. And that feeling Ted mentioned earlier of being alone was definitely there. But we got through it, and it would have been nice, in our email you said something about bereavement care, and I mentioned I missed some school. I had to look that up. What the hell is that? That sounds wonderful. Sign me up. But what I did instead, I don't recommend. At this time is when I really started losing any kind of faith in my spiritual world. I grew up in the Lutheran church, and when Jenny died, as a kid, you hear what kind of God so many times that you start believing that yourself, and you kind of turn your whole, you leave whatever faith I had, I left. If there was a God, I wanted to believe in a God, but I wasn't on good terms with him. And a little bit down the road, things were a mess there for a while. And until I turned 15, and I found alcohol. And boy, that was my medicine for me. And I found new faith in alcohol. It was like, where was this? It was that aha moment when I found that. And that's when I started putting faith in booze. And because it worked, alcohol worked for me to get through pain that I didn't even know that was there. Alcohol worked really well until it didn't. And thank God it hit a point where it didn't. I no longer drink, but I'm happy to say I'm a recovering alcoholic, but it doesn't need to get there. I think I was trying to fill a void with my faith, with my spirituality, and I found it in alcohol, which is not a good way to find it, but it gave me comfort and peace when I really needed it. And I think there's so many better alternatives to get to before you get to that point. But for me, that was great until it wasn't, and it really wasn't for a long time. But when I finally did start taking care of myself, it was kind of a road back to my authentic self, a journey back to the real me. And I found a higher power again, and it filled a void that I really was missing for a long time. And something I turned my back on after Jenny passed away. And that was something that I'm happy to say that I found that again. But wow, that was a rocky road to get there. Bereavement care, that sounds nice. Just somebody to check in because Jenny died, there was this huge buildup for it, and then she was gone, and then we don't have the medical care anymore, but it's like we're just left there. And the family just kind of disintegrated, we were all over the place, and it took, for some of us still haven't dealt with it. My mother, I've dealt with it more than she has. And this is almost 25 years ago. So, God, I feel terrible. I'm so sorry for those who are close to it. I'm 25 years removed, and I'm still figuring it out. So, whatever you guys can come up with for care for a sibling, please keep it up and figure it out, because I want kids, the situation is hard enough losing your loved one, but to try to pick up the pieces and keep going, that help needs to be there. So, sorry for my rambling on with my story, but thank you for everything you guys are doing. And with that, I'll pass. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I have, I think, a little bit of a different story than these guys do. My daughter Ellie passed away on October 25th, 2010, and she passed away very suddenly. She was very healthy up until 9 months and 10 days old when she woke up with a fever, and then she was septic, and next thing we knew, we were at the hospital, and they did everything they could, and they never were able to get ahead of it. They had no answers. And so from the time we took our daughter off of ECMO, which is the heart-lung bypass machine, the time she first showed a fever was 25 hours. And then probably from the time we knew she was not going to make it till the time we turned off her machines was about 12 hours. So it was very quick. It was very different than some of these other families who've gone through months and months of waiting. And all of our stories happened at the hospital. And I guess I should also say I used to be a pediatric oncology nurse at the hospital where my daughter passed away. And I also, at the time, my son was 2 and he was going through the diagnostic process for autism, which he did get that diagnosis about 2 weeks after my daughter passed away. So I feel like I do have some understanding of families who do deal with long-term illnesses as well, having a child that requires a lot and stress that goes with that. But then also I have the understanding of what it's like to be the caregiver on the side, the nurse, and to watch your patients and their families go through this. But you never think you're going to be the parent on that side. And what happened to Ellie was it was almost like a Lifetime movie. She went into something called DIC, which, if you're a medical provider, you know that means she lost all of her clotting ability. So it was just a very horrific thing to see. And because of that, the staff was very traumatized as well. And we didn't get a lot of necessarily support we needed in that moment. People had a hard time looking at us. They would forget to offer us a chair to sit in so we could be by our daughter. When I asked to give her a bath, I was told no. And then certain people started stepping up, physicians, and thankfully other nurses that I had worked with had come down and stepped in and made sure we got what we needed that night. But then, just like Grant said, then we went home, and that was kind of that. That was that. Thankfully, I have a friend who was a child life specialist where I worked. She came to my house as a friend and did some art therapy with my son and my nephew, who was very close to our family, and a cousin. The boys were really young, 2, 4, and 5, and kind of talked to us parents about how do we talk to these kids now about this, because those kids didn't know that babies died, and so it was rough. She did what she could, but then at the end, we were left to kind of figure it out on our own, not only as grieving parents, but also how do we help, these kids try to sort this out. Ellie's grandparents are all still alive. That was really hard to watch them go through that. My grandparents are still alive, and for them to bury a great-grandchild was really hard. And there's no supports for them. People checked in on my husband and I. We did have good friends, but everyone else kind of gets left. And that's hard to watch. The people that you care about struggle. I think what families need is, when I was a nurse, we were always told patient boundaries. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Which I get. They're needed. But when you have a family that's going through the worst thing that they will ever experience, it's okay to be human and to cry with them and to laugh when they say a funny story, or to give them a hug, or offer them water. All of that stuff is okay. It's okay to say, other families I've seen, this is what's helped them. You can step in because you are already a part of their story. Now forever, those people that were there that night, they're part of Ellie's story, they're part of our story, and whether they realize it or not. The big things and the little things they did that night, still 8 years later, I remember. It's just, I think, the little things and the reaching out and saying, you're right, this is terrible, let's not sugarcoat it. This is the worst thing. And
thankfully I had coworkers that I had worked with that came down and were that for me that night, because we did miss that, and yeah, we didn't know what to say to our grandparents. We didn't know what to say to our siblings, to our friends. At that point, no one really knew why Ellie had died. We later found out she had functional aspleenia, which means she had a spleen, but it didn't work. So, had we known, we could have had her on penicillin, and we probably could have prevented sepsis, but we didn't know. And so we walked out that night with no answers as to what happened. She was just gone. And we did have, one thing I will say that was helpful, we did have, I don't know what they called it, a death conference maybe? We met with one of the intensivists at the hospital, and he kind of went through everything and played it back. And for me, that was helpful because the nurse in me knew what was going on that day. I could see what was happening, but I didn't, as the mom, I didn't really see the big picture where we were all going. I never asked to look at a sheet of labs. I never once looked at a bag they hung up. And so for me, that was helpful. And I think my mom came with me and a nurse friend came with me that day. And that was helpful. We were able to ask questions. They told us some things they had learned from that situation that day, because what happened to our daughter is extremely rare. So they were able to learn some things from that day, which was nice to hear too. But then after that was the last we heard from them, really. And we got a bill then on Ellie's birthday a few months later for her care. Just little stuff like that that I don't think people really understand. You get through that initial period of grief. You don't even really know how. You just get through it. You get up out of bed every day somehow. It just happens. And you go through for a couple years. And then I feel like that's really when things start, you look back and think, oh, I wish, maybe this had happened or that had happened. And people are around for the first couple weeks. They have their meals and all of that kind of stuff. But it's, a few years later, I think that things your brain starts to grab on and kind of process what happened. And that's, I think, when people really need to step back in and say, hey, let's process something. And that's what I think families need is the down the road care, the bereavement care.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, my name's Elaine, and I think maybe I better read because I can't think right now. Mariah was my first grandchild. She lived with Ewing's sarcoma, a rare and aggressive form of bone cancer, for 6.5 years. All during those years, depending on her needs Monday through Friday, I would fill in for her mom and dad while they were at work. You see, Rachel and Zach, my son, were already divorced when Mariah was diagnosed in 2004 at age 9. So we had all gotten used to how to operate as a family. We were a family. Also, I'm an RN. I was in the position of providing care, medications, I'm shaking here, rides to the clinic for radiation or blood transfusions, advocating in the hospital, passing along medical information to her peers. Hearing from Mariah was a gift, a heartache, exhausting, memorable, fearful, angry, lonely, overwhelming, and a time to remember it as a sacred time of life. Okay, we'll fast forward a little bit to January 2010. I could see that Mariah was losing heart. She'd sometimes say to me, Nana, I can't do this anymore. She was quite ill again, required frequent platelet infusions, She was getting more radiation, more chemo, but the cancer could not be contained. The day after Valentine's Day, she and her parents and doctor had the big talk, and the decision for hospice or palliative care was reached. It was at this time that Mariah asked to go to a children's hospice home. That was 2010. Only to hear that there was none in Minnesota. She did not want to die at home because of the memory it would leave for all of her siblings. I can tell you she was upset and deeply, deeply discouraged by this information. So I can tell you today that she's smiling down on all of you. And thank you, Crescent Cove. On April 26, 2010, Mariah moved into an adult hospice home called Our Lady of Good Counsel. So Ted asked me to share my accounts of support as a grandparent. As I mentioned, I am an RN whose job was to care for my granddaughter. It was a painful time, and looking back on it, the main support I felt was from my husband, Brian, who listened to me endlessly, who let me rant and rave and cry and jump and holler and go for walks and do whatever I needed to do to get it out. It was a deeply saddening time. I knew what was coming. There were no others around, really. I mean, my family tried, but if you're not in the thick of it, you don't understand it. You all know, I see some of you shaking your head, yes. You understand it. Nobody gets it unless you're in the thick of it. What I can say yesterday when we were doing one of our talks, discussions at the table, that one of the things this provides for me is a community of people who understand what it's like to go through this. So that's huge, even today, this many years later.
Okay.
I'll get this done. There were really no others around that could help, and one of the things too, we were all handling it and trying to cover, to be with her all the time, that there was really no time where her mom and dad and I could talk. And so I missed that too. Plus, I had no time. The hospital and hospice provided medical care, but there was really nothing offered for the rest of us, and that's pretty much what I'm hearing from them too. I wanted to delineate this time outline so that I could again place myself in the chaos of what I was living through, and to remember back to those days of caregiving, of the time alone with her, to those days of knowing the outcome but dreading the end, to being gentle, to listening to her words of joking. She was a great joker. Of words of fear, words of pain and loss. Frankly, there was so much happening that it wasn't much time for me to think. The plan revolved around Mariah. I know some of you understand the sacred, chaotic time I described. So what did I do to care for myself? Well, what I can say is that in a dream the prior Christmas of 2009, I was encouraged to establish a ritual, to do some form of daily or frequent art or mindfulness. I had read about the mandala as an ancient art form. The word mandala is from the classical Indian language of Sanskrit. Loosely it means circle, but the mandala is far more than a simple circle. On January 1, 2010, I began making my first mandala. And over the course of that time at the hospital, at Rachel's house, at Zach's apartment, the hospice home from January 1 to May 15th when she died, I drew over 100 mandalas. When I began this ritual, I was drawn into a new rhythm of breathing, of taking in my surroundings, of quieting my fears and anxiety, to take time to pray for God's guidance during this difficult time, to express my gratitude for her and for all that she taught me, and to accept that this was a sacred time for the two of us. She would often be asleep right beside me. And I would pull out my paper and colored pens and create the day's mandala. I would date it and often use the back for journaling. For years, I truly didn't grasp the significance of the meaning of this ritual that I started 8.5 years ago. Just recently, in preparation for today's talk, I took time to look at every single mandala, and I reread the journal of that day. Although heartbreaking and painful at times, what a blessing it was to read and remember our relationship at that time, about things we talked about a few things when she offered me unsolicited fashion advice, about the love she had for her sister Morgan, for her siblings, her new siblings, for her parents, for her step-up parents, as she called them, her friends, particularly Kayla, what was still on her bucket list. The mandalas from that time are in a box that Brian made for me. I made a mosaic top in the shape of a mandala. The box holds all the mandalas of that sacred time. It's a powerful symbol of the journey of my grief and joy for Mariah. Since that beginning, I still draw mandalas, not daily, but when I'm feeling internal stress, aloneness, sadness, joys, or want to find an avenue of expressing myself. It's a form of self-care. This is the sacred box, and inside are many of the mandalas. Okay, I wouldn't be a grandma unless I had a picture of Mariah with me. So you can come up and look at them after. And then some of the mandalas that I made over that period of time. And feel free to take off one of them and to read the back. It will give you an idea of what happened that day. You don't have to, but it's just an idea. So I spent a lot of time, but it was amazing. She'd sleep through most of this time. And when I think about that, I think she was comfortable, and I was doing something for myself that helped to center me, to help me to breathe deeply, to use that time for prayer. I know you mentioned that. I also, drink wine, but I did. I found that it was a deeply sacred time, and looking back on it, like I said, I didn't realize just how important that was for that period of time. And I've shared these before with some people, but this is the community I wanted to share. Thank you.
Ooh, oh my. What stories. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we express our appreciation to the three of them. letting that in. Their support. Pete, I think I'm going to shift the agenda just a bit. I think this is so filling. I want you to turn to one another and have some conversations about what's just happened, about what you heard, about what struck a chord with you. What were they also telling us through their rich, moving stories about choices of supported care? And which of those might fit for Crescent Cove? So take a breath with each other, be gentle with one another because of the way that they shared their stories, and let's talk for just a few minutes with one another about some of the implications of these kinds of stories for the work that proceeds. I'll give you a few minutes, then I'll ring the chime, and then we'll talk about some of the resources that are available in the community to augment what we're talking about with one another. So turn to 2 or 3 at your tables. Get at a place where you can talk easily with one another. You might not want the whole table.